Welcome, my friends. Today we're going to be talking about conquering suffering and maximizing fulfillment as we head into this new year of 2024. The thing about suffering is it's a very misunderstood phenomenon. Most people don't realize that the things that they're actually suffering with have nothing to do with the circumstances of their reality today. All suffering dates back all the way to our childhood years, really. It breaks down into two categories. You have your childhood traumas, which inform your patterns later on in life. These are informed all the way from the womb, all the way up through 7. Traumas can go all the way through life, but we have our most impactful years from when we're born all the way until we're 7 years old. These are when we pick up all of our suffering patterns, all of our imprints, all the rejection and the shame and the abandonment and the abuse and the embarrassment. These are patterns that we keep and carry in our nervous system. So trauma informs suffering. Trauma doesn't come back as a memory. Trauma comes back as a pattern of reactivity. When we're reacting to things in our life, circumstances in our life, it actually has nothing to do with the trigger. The trigger is just triggering something old from our past. So if we get upset with our boyfriend or upset with our girlfriend, has nothing to do with what they've done in the moment, has something to do with some old wound that we're carrying from our past that's materializing itself in the present. So they say the pain from our past, we're living in the present, and it's hijacking our future. Now that's just our childhood trauma. But science has now proven that we're carrying this whole phenomenon of generational trauma or intergenerational trauma. There's scientific studies that have proven that we're carrying around the wounds of our ancestors going back 14 generations. 14. So forget about the childhood that you had, that we had. We could have lived a very blessed childhood. What have our ancestors been through? Think about multiple world wars, sexual discrimination, racial discrimination, famines, pandemics. Our ancestors have seen a lot. So we're actually carrying around these wounds as cellular memory, as DNA. We're carrying it around in our body, and it's manifesting in emotional dysregulation. It's manifesting as old patterns that we can't quite figure out where they came from. So all this suffering that we like to blame on the world around us is actually something that we came into this world with, combined with what we experienced as children. So the reality is, 8 billion of us, or however many people there are on the planet, are all traumatized human beings carrying around these old wounds, and it's affecting how we show up in our life. It's affecting how we show up in our relationships. It's affecting our self-esteem, our emotional well-being. So if we can figure out how to get a handle on purging this old energy that's trapped in our body, then we ultimately have the key to eradicate suffering within our own lives. One of the things that the Buddha says is life is suffering. What are the areas that people suffer in life? If you think about it, we struggle with our relationships, our health, our finances. We struggle with our mental health. We create all of these barriers and blockades that stop us from allowing us the opportunity to feel good. And so one of the things that happens is people numb themselves out. They try to run away from it. But really the only way out is through. I think one of the biggest illusions that people struggle with is they create this fairy tale lifestyle that they're just going to feel good all the time. And as much as Instagram might lead us to believe that based on these public figures, they're living these amazing lives, they're traveling, they're always feeling good, it's just a massive illusion. Life is a coin flip. Some days you feel good, some days you feel bad. The problem is that when we feel bad, we create these massive stories that our life is all messed up and jacked up and something is wrong, as opposed to just allowing ourselves to feel down and feel low. And so really, the way through suffering is just to realize, well, today I just don't feel all that good, and make that be okay. And instead of making some massive story around it, that creates some complex, just allow ourselves to feel what we feel in our body and wait and be patient and allow that feeling to pass. And we have our breath that allows us to do that, and we'll leave that for another section. But this is really about just allowing ourselves the space to be human. And really one of the biggest challenges that so many of us are struggling with is just a total lack of emotional resilience. You know, we get triggered by all these things in our life. Everything kind of sets us off. We're angry, we're upset, we're sad, we're victims, whatever the case might be. But we have the ability to strengthen that emotional resilience muscle so that no matter what's going on in the outside world, on the inside, you know, we're like a ship. We're like a shipping freighter in a big storm at sea. It's barely even moving. The problem is on the emotional resilience side is that most people have this little tiny sailboat, and so it's getting rocked around like crazy. So one of the biggest things that we can do is figure out how to become more emotionally resilient. That means that no matter what's going on the outside, you know, we can be good. I think one of the easiest ways to really conquering suffering is to realize that it's just a mental state. It actually has nothing to do with our external circumstances. You know, this can be proven. Just look at some of the poorest people in the world that live in little villages. They live in harmony with each other. They have their family connections, their social connections, they have just enough food, they got their basic needs taken care of. They don't have all the extravagant things of life, but somehow they're still happy. You put a modern day person from the Western world in a similar situation, and they imagine that that's an environment of extreme suffering that's going to cause them deep remorse and sadness. And the reality is nothing could be further from the truth. Really, at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want to be able to love fully. We want to be loved by others. We want to have meaning and passion and purpose in our life. We just want to feel good. You know, we want to feel content in our life. And as we get closer to achieving that, we get closer to this idea of being fulfilled and living fulfilled. Really what it comes down to is purpose, passion, and meaningful connections. When life has purpose, when we feel like we have something to get us out of bed every day, all of a sudden life can feel very fulfilling. When we feel like our life is meaning or contributing to a cause that's greater to ourselves, life can be very fulfilling. And we're human beings, we're hardwired for social connection. When that connection isn't there, whether that connection is within ourselves or with community around us, we feel like something is missing, we get lonely because we're hardwired for human connection. And I think one of the things that we mess up a lot of the time is we create this grandiose vision that our life has to have this really profound purpose in order for us to be happy. The reality is it's just not how it works. I just take my mom, for example. You ask my mom what her life purpose is, and she's gonna tell you my life purpose is to be an amazing grandmother. You know, it's not to save the world, it's not to be the next Gandhi, it's to have beautiful grandchildren and take care of them on Christmas. That's her life purpose, and that keeps her happy. And so I think if we can stop getting into this fairy tale vision of needing to do these major grandiose things in our life, we can get back to that place where we realize that all we have to do is really close our eyes, go within, and realize that we can feel incredibly happy and content and fulfilled in our life in this moment just by the rhythm of our own breath. It can literally be that simple. Really, one of the biggest things that can inform living fulfilled in our life and taking fulfillment into a new year is understanding what our values are. You know, for me, it's family, it's integrity, it's making an impact, it's having empathy, it's having compassion, all the things that 9D are all about. But it's not just having an understanding of what those values are, it's actually operating and living within those values. Because there's our desired values and then there's our true values. And our desired values is like a goal that we're not actually working toward achieving. You can say that your value is family, but if you're not taking time for your family, that's actually not a value, that's just a desired value. But when you have a value and you're actually doing things and you're living your life in order to be able to actually put weight and stock into that value, that's naturally going to bring massive amount of fulfillment. Like if you say, these are the things that are most important to me in my life going into this new year, and every day you wake up and put all the decisions that you're making in your life through those filters of those values, and you actually are putting stock into those values, naturally this is going to bring out a maximum amount of fulfillment in life. But there's this expression that Brene Brown says that I love, and she says, we all have the opportunity for our mess to become our message. You know, so what is the major thing that we're struggling with in our life that we have the ability to alchemize and turn into transformation gold, our life purpose? Everybody has one. And so I think if we start to really reframe our struggles through this lens of, this is the big thing that once I conquer has the ability to transform my life and the work and the service that I bring into the world, this is a massive opportunity. Like one of my students, one of my very earliest students, when I was taking all my own sales calls in the beginning of 9D Breathwork, beautiful soul named Sherry. I had this conversation with her I'll never forget. And she said, Brian, before we talk about your program, can I share with you what happened when I did your breathwork session, the 9D breathwork session? She did it at home on her computer. I wasn't even there. So I told, yes, Sherry, I would love to hear that story. And what Sherry said was, it all started when I was 17 years old. I was kidnapped at knife point. I was held hostage. I was brought into a room with a door with many locks, and I was made to do terrible things. I realized this didn't sound like your standard testimonial, but I stayed right there with her and I listened. And she said, all my life I carried this trauma. 50 years I barricaded my bedroom door closed out of fear that my kidnapper was going to come back and take me again. She said, I tried everything and nothing worked. And then I did your breathwork journey. She said, somewhere in that session, my kidnapper came in, but he was in this big golden ball of light. And that was the moment that I could feel myself not only forgive him, but love him. I thought, you know, wow, this was probably the most heroic thing I had ever heard. I wasn't even there. She conquered this massive trauma that she'd been carrying around 50 years of her life. And what she said next was, I realized in that session that 40 years I've been doing this job I don't like. I want to quit that job. I want to become a transformational breath coach, and I want to help other traumatized women heal their sexual trauma with the breath. And that's exactly what she did. And it's a perfect example of how your mess can become your message. And so I think that through this frame, we have a really amazing opportunity to start to look at the most challenging, tragic, traumatizing experiences of our entire life and look at it through the frame of what happens when I flip the switch on this thing and allow this thing to inform who I become, the individual that I become once I transcend and transmute this energy into something creative. So when Sherry figured that out, she was 67 years old. How many people do we know that have never figured out what they want to do with their life? The impact they want to make, the service that they want to have. Some people go their whole life and never figure it out. So if you're watching this, it doesn't matter how old you are. You could be 20, 30, 40, 50, all the way up to 90. You find that thing that lights you up and then you do that. So what are some of the practical ways that we can conquer our suffering? First of all, I feel like we could all do with a healthy dose of self-love and compassion for ourselves. You know, we go through these periods of our life and what happens is we have this natural tendency of wanting to beat ourselves up, judge ourselves, kick ourselves while we're down. We should be our biggest cheerleader. You know, we should be the ones that are lifting ourselves up, that are allowing ourselves the opportunity and the space to be human. That's number one. Number two is a recognition that the things that we're struggling with, they're not actually our fault to begin with. If you look back to the things that we talked about in the beginning of this video, we're talking about childhood trauma. We were purely vulnerable at that point. We didn't have the ability to control or navigate our lives. We were dependent upon others around us. So we picked up all their toxic, all the good, the bad, and the ugly from when we were children, we picked up and we carry it around as adults as if it were our own. Then you talk about generational traumas and struggles. We didn't have any capability to control any of that. All of the suffering, there's so much suffering, it doesn't matter where you came from, what culture you came from, we're carrying around that baggage. So having an understanding that the things that we're carrying that are causing our suffering is not actually our fault at all, is the actual thing that allows us to have a lot of self-love and compassion for ourselves and the struggles that we're going through. Number three is a bit of a paradox, because number three is all about taking full personal responsibility and accountability. Even if it wasn't your fault, what you do with it is, and healing it is our responsibility. So we have to be willing to do the work. We have to be willing to purge the things that we're carrying around in our body. What's the alternative? The alternative is continuing to allow ourselves to struggle and suffer, not being willing to actually do anything about it. The problem is doing the work is very challenging. Purging these things that live in our body is not the easiest thing to do. We have to be willing to face that pressure cooker in order to be able to come out the other side a little bit more polished, a little bit more at ease in our life. We need to go from this place of feeling like we're at effect in our life, like everything is around us informing how we think, how we act, how we feel, to being at cause. I am the master of my domain. I am the one that gets to decide today if I'm going to have a good day or bad day. I'm the one that gets to decide if I'm going to be emotionally resilient or if I'm going to let everything upset me and trigger me. So being willing to do that work and get into the pressure cooker and allow that to just be an uncomfortable experience is the way out of suffering. And number four is, once you have an understanding and a realization that doing the work is the most important thing, number four is actually doing the work. So we got to figure out, what is it that I need to do to purge this old, dark, stuck energy that I'm carrying around in our body? Our body is soma. We have a somatic element to our life. All the struggles and the complexes and the traumas, all this stuff that's buried in our bones and our fascia and our nervous system, it's all in our body. So we have to have a somatic element to releasing that. We all come with a pressure release valve. We have to have the courage to be willing to push it. And pushing it allows us to have this purge of release that breathwork really allows us to unlock, that allows this stuck energy an opportunity to release itself. And that's what the real work looks like doing. And that's ultimately the path to freedom and liberation. And then finally, once we have moved some stuff around and we've purged some of this energy, there's techniques and hacks that we can do to make sure that we don't continue to bottle up and suppress our emotions and our feelings like humans all too often do. One of them is called the 90-second rule. 90-second rule is a very simple thing. Science has proven that we have the ability to process out our simple emotions, our frustration, our anger, our fear, our sadness, just by breathing in through our nose, breathing down into our diaphragm, setting a timer. So in that next moment when you get triggered by something in your external world, instead of locking up and locking it in, you breathe through it, you set a timer for 90 seconds, you don't create a mental narrative or a story around it, and so you're literally processing through your emotions and your feelings in real time. And how do we do that? Is by breathing down into our belly. Very simple, yet very profound. And it doesn't always take these big somatic breathwork journeys. There's a lot of different things that we could be doing to allow ourselves to really slow down. The first stage to self-awareness is breath awareness, simply taking time throughout the day to just be aware that we're breathing. And when we're aware that we're breathing, slowing our breath down and being conscious of where the breath is going, breathing in through our nose, breathing down into our belly, mindfulness, doing a little bit of meditation, a little bit of yoga, anything that allows us to slow down our mind, get down into our body, brings us into the present moment. Most of the struggling that we experience is because hyper-analysis of the past or over-forecasting of the future. The reality is, right now as you're watching this video, you're probably doing pretty good. As long as your mind isn't traveling around into some other circumstance that's occupying your mental space. So simply allowing us the space to be slow, be quiet, be in our body, this is the answer. So what are some practical things that we can do? If you don't have a habit of becoming breath aware, set a little alarm. Set an alarm to go off every hour. When that alarm goes off, you can practice being self-aware, being breath aware, just for 1 or 2 breaths. If you have trouble meditating, practice some breath work and then meditate, because breath work is going to quiet the mind so that when you go into meditation, the mind isn't all over the place. And the big one really is new habit creation, habit development. This is one of the areas that messes a lot of people up. The biggest New Year's resolution is, I'm gonna get into the gym and I'm gonna work out an hour a day, and then by February 14th, 80% of the gym memberships fizzle out and people stop going to the gym. Why? Because they set too big of a goal. So all we need to do is set these little mini habits. Instead of going to the gym for an hour, you do 1 single push-up. You might think about, what is the purpose of doing 1 single push-up? It's actually a lot, because what's going to happen is you're going to get down to do that 1 single push-up, and you're going to realize, I'm down here already. I might as well do 5 push-ups. I might as well do 10 push-ups. Shit, maybe I should even just go to the gym. But you can check that box on a day you don't feel good. You can still check that dopamine box, and you know that every day you're working slowly toward creating new habits that's going to create a new life. You do enough of these things and you compound them over time. Little steps every single day makes maximum progress over the course of a year. Now, I realize it might sound cliche, but the biggest thing that, at least for my life, that I know that I always need to be doing is just working on myself. What am I doing every single day to make myself a little bit better? And so what does Tony Robbins call it? He calls it sharpening the saw. What books am I reading? What things am I trying? What skill am I building? How am I expanding my own mind? What am I working on conquering in my life? And that way I have a plan in order to be able to continue to make sure that every day I'm making progress toward those things. And then ultimately just figuring out what excites me. I feel like figuring out what I'm passionate about, what lights me up, is the way that I know that I'm in alignment with God's purpose for me in my life. And then doing more of that. And if you don't know what you're passionate about, you don't know what you're excited about, that just gives you an epic opportunity to be trying new things constantly until you figure it out. Because you might not have the ability to make your passion your work, as I have, right away, but you can definitely over time. You find that thing and you keep working on figuring out how to get better at it. It could be a hobby, it could be a new skill, it doesn't really matter. But if you're going in that direction and you continue to pursue that direction, all that hard work will create opportunity, and all that opportunity will manifest as long as there's passion, there's patience, and there's persistence. Another one of the big things that people struggle with is many people I know have surrounded themselves by people that are completely toxic in their life. They're not supportive of their goals, they throw stones at their dreams. One of the best things that we could do is simply just cut these people out of our life. And I realize that might sound tricky. But the reality is, if we have these people, these energetic vampires that are projecting their inconsistencies and their lack of desire to do something with their life, if we're surrounded by these people, it's going to be very challenging to make progress along the path of actually doing something with our life that fulfills us, that allows us to get out of this cycle of suffering. Misery loves company. So if you have people that are miserable in your life and they're bringing you down, simply cut those people off. And then what happens is we're creating space for new higher vibe relationships to come into our life. People that are on the same page, that are wanting to get better, that are wanting to do things, to make an impact, to be of service in the world. And one of the biggest shifts we can really make in our life is to go from this consciousness of to me, which says everything that's happening in my life is happening to me. All these external circumstances are happening to me. Ultimately, I'm at effect of my environment. This is all happening to me. That thing, this person did this to me. I got stuck in this traffic accident. This is why I'm so sad, frustrated, upset, whatever the case might be. This quantum shift that we can make is going from to me for me. Then everything that's happening in our life, whether I'm stubbing my toe or breaking my leg, it's actually there for a reason, to give me something that I can work with. And then beyond that, it's not just for me, it's by me. And when everything is now we're going through the lens of I'm creating it, it's all by me, it's all for me, then I have the ability to realize that no matter what's happening in my life, I can figure out a way to work with it, alchemize it, and turn it into gold. This is ultimately the path out of suffering and the path into fulfillment. And when that happens, it's easy to just be grateful for all of it. One of the most challenging things I ever went through in my life was in 2008, I lost everything. I thought it was the worst possible thing that could ever happen to me in my life. Fast forward all these years later, and I realized it's actually the best thing that ever happened to me. It gave me the opportunity to really reevaluate what's important in my life, what do I want to do with my life, and how do I want to live my life. I needed to have that breakdown in order to be able to have the breakthrough. So it allowed me now to create space to just be grateful for everything that happens in my life. So as we go into this new year, I just want everybody to remember that really the big takeaway from all this is that fulfillment is an inner game. It has nothing to do with the outside world. When we work here, when we work on the internal, the external has a funny way of taking care of itself. And so really it's just all about looking at our life. Like, let's take stock of our 2023. What worked? Why did it work? What didn't work? Why didn't it work? What do I want to stop doing and what do I want to start doing? If we stop doing the things that are causing us misery and we start doing more of the things that bring us a little bit more joy, life is probably going to feel a little bit more fulfilling, right? And so really, that's all about full surrender and gratitude for all the crazy stuff we went through last year, and anticipating and feeling into and allowing ourselves to feel what it will feel like to feel transformed and expanded and fulfilled going into the new year. Because it's not the things that we want in our life. It's not things that we want. It's the feeling that we think having those things will evoke. We don't want to have a lot of money. We want the feeling of financial security. And that feeling is ultimately the desire. And so if we allow ourselves to feel that feeling in advance before the thing comes, then we bypass needing the thing at all. It sounds crazy, I realize, but this is the fastest way that we can get into a good place in our life, to allow ourselves to get out of all the crazy mental monkey mind chatter, to get down into the body and to create space for the fulfilling life that's already there to expose itself and then living that way.